Ethan Walker's boots punched through the snow crust like breaking bones. The Arctic winter had teeth this year, sharper than the ice shards stinging his cheeks. His patrol route along the frozen Caprik River was usually silent, but today the wind carried something else. A sound that didn't belong. Not an animal. Not the ice. A child's whimper. He froze, glove hovering near his rifle. 20 miles from the nearest village. No one came here in winter. Then he heard it again, higher pitched, desperate. Following the sound, Ethan crested a pressure ridge. Below, the ice bridge spanning the river had been altered. Someone had carved a pit into its center, its edges polished smooth by poured water. And inside. God Almighty. The words steamed from his lips. A polar bear cub, no bigger than a sheepdog, scrambled against the pit's walls. Its claws left bloody streaks on the ice. Frost cemented its eyelashes shut. The moment it sensed Ethan, the cub collapsed with a broken sound, not a growl, but a plea. Ethan's radio crackled. Base to Ranger 4, check-in overdue. He never got to respond. A thunderous snap echoed downstream. The cub's head jerked up. Ethan's binoculars revealed the horror, a massive female bear tangled in steel cables, her front paw twisted at a sickening angle. Blood painted the snow in violent arcs where she'd fought. Their eyes met across the tundra. The mother bear stopped struggling. And looked at him. Not with rage. With understanding. Ethan's hands shook as he unshouldered his pack. The thermometer read -42 degrees Fahrenheit. The cub wouldn't last another hour. Neither would he if the poachers returned. The rescue rope burned Ethan's palms as he secured it around an ice boulder. Each gust of wind stole his body heat like a thief. Below, the cub's breathing had slowed to shallow gasps, hypothermia setting in. First rule of Arctic survival, never sweat. Yet sweat glued his long johns to his back as he hurled the rope down. The loop missed. Again. On the third try, the noose settled around the cub's torso. A new sound cut through the wind, snowmobile engines. Too close. Ethan hauled upward, muscles screaming. The cub was dead weight, its fur stiff with ice. Just as its paws cleared the edge, a gunshot cracked across the tundra. Hands where we can see, Ranger. Ethan spun, shielding the cub with his body. 3 men in white camo emerged from the blizzard, rifles raised. The leader's scar split his eyebrow like a lightning bolt. Scarface kicked the empty pit. That cub's worth $80,000 in China. He racked his bolt action. Now step away. The bundled cub whimpered against Ethan's chest. He calculated options. Comply equals cub dies. Fight equals both die. Distract equals maybe. Ethan lunged left, hurling his thermos at the nearest poacher. Boiling tea exploded in the man's face. In the chaos, Ethan dove behind an ice ridge with the cub. Gunfire shattered the silence. Then, an unearthly roar. The mother bear erupted from the storm, cables still dangling from her bloody paw. She stood between Ethan and the poachers, her breath frosting the air like dragon smoke. For one frozen heartbeat, no one moved. Then Scarface whispered, "Oh hell," as 1,200 pounds of vengeance charged. The mother bear's first swipe sent a poacher flying 10 feet. His scream ended in a sickening crunch against the ice bridge. Ethan clutched the cub tighter, its heartbeat fluttering against his ribs like a dying bird. He had seconds to act. Scrambling backward, he ripped open his medkit with his teeth. The cub's temperature was catastrophic, 90 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. He sandwiched the tiny body between heated gel packs, then wrapped them both in his parka. Nearby, the remaining poachers were losing. The mother bear moved like a blizzard incarnate, one moment looming over Scarface, the next swiping the rifle from his partner's hands. Then she made her mistake. She paused, sniffing the wind. Ethan followed her gaze to the ice bridge. The first poacher, the one she'd thrown, was crawling toward a black duffel. More weapons. No. Ethan's shout tore his throat raw. The bear charged just as the poacher rolled over, a pistol flashing. 2 shots rang out. The bear stumbled but kept moving. The third shot hit her shoulder, a spray of crimson on snow. Ethan was moving before he thought, tackling the shooter into the ice. They grappled for the gun, their breath mingling in frantic clouds. Somewhere behind them, the mother bear roared in agony. The pistol went off between them. White-hot pain seared Ethan's thigh. He barely felt it. Because in that moment, the ice bridge groaned. Then cracked. The world upended as the ice split beneath them. Ethan's stomach lurched as he plunged into the Creek River's black embrace. The cold wasn't just pain, it was obliteration. Every nerve fired at once, then went terrifyingly silent. Something heavy brushed his legs, the poacher sinking like a stone. Ethan kicked toward the faint glow above, the cub's bundled form still miraculously tucked against him. His head broke surface into chaos. The shattered ice bridge bobbed in chunks. 20 yards away, the mother bear struggled in the water, her injured paw leaving a scarlet swirl. Scarface stood on solid ice, rifle raised. Not at the bear. At Ethan. Should have stayed in your tower, Ranger. The gunshot never came. Because the cub in Ethan's arms screamed, a sound no polar bear should make. High. Human-like. The mother bear reacted instantly, surging through the water with terrifying speed. Scarface's second shot went wide as 800 pounds of wet fury exploded onto the ice. Ethan used the distraction to haul himself onto a floe, the cub's weight nearly dragging him under. His leg burned where the bullet had grazed it. Every gasp seared his lungs. Then he saw her. The mother bear had Scarface pinned, her jaws inches from his face. The man's screams echoed across the tundra. Ethan knew he should stop her. Knew what a mauling would mean for conservation efforts. But the cub in his arms had stopped shivering. A worse kind of cold gripped Ethan's heart. He met the mother bear's eyes across the ice and made his choice. The medevac helicopter's rotors drowned out Ethan's thoughts. Wrapped in thermal blankets, he watched the cub, now dubbed Nanak by the Inuit medics, breathe steadily in its oxygen tent. "You're lucky," the doctor said, stitching Ethan's leg. Another minute in that water. Ethan barely heard her. His mind replayed those final moments. The mother bear releasing Scarface unharmed. Her nudge toward Ethan's bleeding leg, "Check your cub." The way she'd vanished into the storm, leaving only a single bloody paw print on his backpack. A nurse handed him a clipboard. For the incident report. What really happened out there? Ethan stared at the form. How could he explain? That the bear had recognized him. That when he'd whispered, "I'll protect her," in Inuktitut, the mother had touched her nose to Nanak's forehead through the blankets. He wrote 4 words, "Nature remembered our bond." Outside, the northern lights shimmered green. Somewhere beneath them, a wounded bear walked alone through the frozen dark. And for the first time in his career, Ethan Walker wept. The antiseptic stench of the wildlife clinic clung to Ethan's skin as he limped past Nanak's enclosure for the 3rd time that night. The cub's breathing had changed, shallow, rapid. Through the observation glass, her ice-blue eyes tracked him with an intelligence that unsettled the biologists. "She imprinted on you," Talia had warned. "That's not love. It's trauma." Ethan pressed his palm against the cold glass. Nanak mirrored the gesture, her tiny claws clicking against the barrier. The heart monitor beeped faster. Then the nightmares rushed back. Scarface's rifle flashing in the storm. The mother bear's blood swirling in black water. The crunch of bones as the ice swallowed a screaming poacher. Walker. Code Blue. A vet tech sprinted past. Nanak was seizing. Ethan crashed through the doors as alarms wailed. The cub thrashed on the exam table, foam flecking her muzzle. Something primal tore through him, he knew this was no ordinary seizure. Poison, he growled, spotting the raw scrape on Nanak's paw. Check between her toes. Talia's forceps pulled out a sliver of wood, drunken sailor's bark, used by Arctic poachers to silence dogs. Someone had slipped it into the enclosure. As Nanak's heartbeat stabilized, Ethan stared at the toxic splinter. The message was clear, we know where you are. The storm hit at midnight. Ethan was reviewing security footage when the first gunshot shattered the lobby windows. Glass rained down as Scarface's voice echoed through the halls. Come out, Ranger. We just want what's ours. Nanak roared in her enclosure, rattling the steel bars. Ethan slapped the emergency lockdown, sealing her chamber just as a Molotov cocktail exploded in the nursery. Talia dragged him behind an overturned desk. They'll burn the whole station. Through the smoke, Ethan counted 3 shadows. Scarface was bleeding from his temple, the mother bear's parting gift. His accomplice carried a tranquilizer rifle with a muzzle big enough for a grown polar bear. They came for Nanak. Ethan's fingers closed around a scalpel. Get to the generator. Kill the lights. The darkness came with a metallic scream. In the chaos, Ethan learned 2 truths. A polar bear cub's cry sounds exactly like a human child's. Poachers bleed just as red as the animals they hunt. When the backup generators kicked on, Scarface was gone, but his blood trail led straight to Nanak's shattered enclosure. Empty. The blizzard swallowed Ethan's screams as he tracked the poacher's snowmobile trail. His injured leg left crimson blossoms in the snow. Somewhere ahead, Nanak's terrified chirps cut through the wind. Then he heard it. A sound deeper than thunder, the mother bear's hunting roar. Ethan crested the ridge just as the nightmare unfolded. Scarface's snowmobile lay overturned, its driver missing. The accomplice fired wildly into the storm as 1,200 pounds of white fury materialized behind him. But Ethan's eyes were drawn to the smaller shape waddling toward the bear, Nanak, dragging her 4 bag through the snow. The mother bear froze. Nanak chirped. The bear sniffed, then recoiled. Ethan understood first. She doesn't recognize the scent. The clinic soap. A gunshot rang out. The mother bear staggered as the tranquilizer dart pierced her shoulder. Scarface emerged from the storm, rifle smoking. 2 bears for the price of 1. As the drugs took effect, the bear did something unimaginable, she looked at Ethan. And charged him instead of the poachers. The world became a whirl of teeth and snow. Ethan braced for death, but the mother bear's jaws closed gently around his parka hood. She dragged him toward Nanak as Scarface's bullets kicked up ice around them. Talia's voice crackled on the radio, Ethan. The dart, it was ketamine. His blood ran colder than the Arctic wind. Ketamine induced waking nightmares in bears. The mother thought she was saving her cub from him. Nanak wailed as the bear swiped at Ethan's face. He barely rolled away in time, his survival knife glinting. Listen to me. He grabbed Nanak, holding the squirming cub toward the drugged bear. She's yours. Remember the river. The bear's amber eyes dilated. For a heartbeat, just one, Ethan saw recognition flicker. Then Scarface's bullet tore through her flank. The ketamine-fueled roar shook glaciers loose. Inuit legend speaks of Tornak, spirit bears who walk as both animal and human. As Ethan bled in the snow cave with the wounded mother bear and Nanak, old man Kunak's stories came back. When a bear saves a man, their hearts become one. The mother bear panted in pain, Scarface's bullet lodged near her spine. Nanak nuzzled against her, whimpering. Ethan's trembling hands sterilized his knife over a lighter. You'll hate me for this, he whispered. The surgery took 11 minutes. The bear's agonized growls echoed through the ice. When Ethan finally extracted the bullet, she rewarded him with a swipe that laid open his forearm. Blood dripped onto the ice between them. Nanak licked Ethan's wound, then the bear's. The mother bear stared at the mingled blood. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, but truce. Outside, Scarface's shouts grew closer. The bear stood, testing her legs. She nudged Nanak toward Ethan with her muzzle, keep her safe, then vanished into the storm. Toward the poachers. Toward vengeance. The Conservation Board's verdict was unanimous. Nanak can never be wild. She'll live in captivity. Ethan stared at the cub playing with a tire swing in her enclosure. The scars from the poacher's attack had healed, but she still woke screaming from nightmares. Talia handed him the transfer papers. Anchorage Zoo has space. That night, Ethan did the unthinkable, he opened Nanak's gate. The cub hesitated at the threshold, sniffing the tundra wind. Go find her, Ethan whispered. Nanak took 3 steps, then turned back, pressing her forehead to his. The radio crackled, Ranger Walker. We've got poachers at the ice caves. Scarface's voice echoed in his memory, that mother bear's pelt will buy me a new life. Ethan made his choice. The ice caves wept. Spring had come early, turning the frozen tunnels to death traps. Ethan tracked Scarface's boot prints through slush that shouldn't exist in March. Nanak walked beside him, not as a pet, but a companion. Twice, she'd stopped him from stepping on thin ice. Then they heard the gunshots. The mother bear was cornered at a dead-end cavern, her back to a crumbling ice wall. Scarface and 2 new hunters had her surrounded. Right on time, Scarface grinned, aiming at Ethan. Now watch what happens to meddlers. The glacier groaned. Nanak charged. Chaos erupted. The mother bear lunged as Nanak barreled into Scarface's legs. Ethan tackled the nearest poacher into a snowdrift. Then the cave screamed. A pillar of ice shattered, revealing the true horror. Scarface had anchored the mother bear with steel cables to the weakest part of the ceiling. Die together, he laughed, raising his rifle, not at the bears, but at the glacier's heart. Ethan's bullet took him in the shoulder first. The cave collapsed anyway. Buried in blue darkness, Ethan tasted blood. Nanak whined beside him, her fur matted with ice. The mother bear was worse, her hindquarters crushed under a boulder-sized ice chunk. Yet she was moving, digging at the debris with her one free paw. Ethan crawled to help, their breaths mingling in the frigid air. The bear's eyes locked onto his, no ketamine madness now, just clear, painful understanding. She shoved Nanak toward the tiny exit she'd made, then looked at Ethan. Take her. Go. The ice above them groaned. Ethan grabbed Nanak and rolled into the tunnel just as the mother bear pushed the ice boulder upward with her last strength, holding the collapse at bay long enough for them to escape. Her final roar followed them into the light. The midnight sun bled across the tundra as Ethan studied the impossible footprints. 3-toed, Talia whispered, running her fingers along the claw marks. Like Nanak's, but bigger. Ethan's prosthetic leg ached with the coming storm. These tracks were fresh, made within the hour, yet led straight toward the abandoned ice caves where the mother bear had died. Nanak paced behind them, nostrils flaring. She'd refused food for 2 days, obsessively sniffing the northern winds. That's not possible, Talia insisted. We buried her ourselves. A gunshot cracked across the tundra. Ethan tackled Talia into the snow as the bullet whined past. Scarface's laugh echoed from the ridge above, hoarse and unhinged. Miss me, Ranger? The madman looked half-dead himself, his face a patchwork of frostbite scars. But the rifle in his hands was new, its scope glinting. Nanak's roar shook the ground as she charged. Scarface didn't shoot at her. He fired at the ice caves. The explosion shattered the fragile permafrost. As the tunnels collapsed in a roar of snow and splintered ice, Ethan saw it. A flash of white fur deeper in the caves. Moving. Alive. The cave-in buried Scarface's laughter under tons of ice. Ethan dug with bare hands, blood frosting his fingertips. Nanak worked beside him, her powerful claws throwing snow like a machine. Somewhere beneath them, the ghost bear still breathed. Ethan felt it in the vibrations through the ice. Talia radioed for backup, but the storm had grounded all helicopters. Even if we reach her, she shouted over the wind, no bear could survive 5 years alone out here. Ethan's shovel struck something soft. White fur. Not decayed, warm. The massive head that emerged from the snow wasn't the mother bear, but her sister. Identical crescent scar on the left paw. Same notch in the right ear. The bear's amber eyes locked onto Nanak with eerie recognition before she collapsed, ribs protruding through matted fur. Talia's medkit clattered to the ice. She's got Nanak's exact DNA markers. Like a twin, Ethan finished. The truth unfolded like a nightmare. Scarface hadn't just trapped one bear at the river 5 years ago. He'd trapped 2 sisters. One who saved Ethan. One who'd been suffering alone all this time. As the sister bear's labored breaths fogged the air, Nanak did something no scientist could explain. She pressed her forehead to the dying bears and whimpered, a sound never recorded in polar bear vocalizations. A sound like a name. A goodbye. The sister bear died at dawn. Not with a roar, but with a sigh that seemed to melt the surrounding frost. Nanak refused to leave the body, laying across it like a living shroud as the storm howled. Ethan's radio crackled. Scarface had been spotted heading toward the research station. He's finishing what he started, Talia said, packing the medkit. Nanak lifted her head, sniffing the wind. Then she did something unprecedented. She pushed Ethan toward the snowmobile. Not this time, Ethan whispered, kneeling to her level. You stay with her. Nanak's teeth closed gently around his wrist, not to harm, but to lead. She dragged him to the sister bear's paw, where fresh claw marks pointed northeast. Toward the research station. Toward Scarface. A message. A plan. As the snowmobile roared to life, Nanak took one last look at her twin's body before vanishing into the blizzard on her own path. Ethan understood now, the bears had been communicating in ways science couldn't measure. And the final act wasn't his to choose. The research station burned like a beacon in the Arctic night. Scarface had barricaded himself inside the nursery wing, where 7 orphaned cubs huddled in steel cages. His rifle barrel rested against the smallest cub's head as Ethan burst in. Drop the gun or I paint the walls. Scarface screamed. Nanak's roar answered from outside. But it wasn't alone. From the storm emerged a ghost army, every bear Ethan and Nanak had saved over 5 years. The one-eared male from the oil spill. The young siblings whose mother was shot by poachers. Even old White Fong, who'd lost an eye to a steel trap. 20 polar bears. 20 living testaments. Scarface's rifle trembled. They're just animals. Ethan smiled. You're right. He stepped aside as Nanak led the charge. The bears didn't maul Scarface. They herded him, a living prison of muscle and teeth, straight to the waiting rangers. At dawn, as the helicopters carried Scarface away, the bears dispersed without a sound. All but Nanak, who lingered at the tree line. Ethan approached slowly, his heart pounding. Her muzzle was streaked with blood, not Scarface's, but from the Arctic hare she'd caught. A wild meal. A wild bear's meal. The choice was hers now. Nanak nuzzled his hand one last time before turning north, toward the ice caves, toward the sister bear's final resting place. Ethan didn't follow. Some stories aren't meant to be seen to their end. Some hearts beat forever in the spaces between wild and tame. And in the place where happiness is found, the ice remembers every act of courage. Every act of love. 5 years later, Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the Arctic Ocean, his prosthetic leg sinking into permafrost. Beside him, Nanak, now 600 pounds of muscle and scars, sniffed the wind. She'd refused to leave after the cave-in, standing vigil until the ice melted enough to recover the mother bear's body. Today, the conservation center was quiet. Tourists whispered as they passed Nanak's enclosure, reading the plaque. The bear who chose to stay. But they didn't see what Ethan did, the way Nanak's ears perked up every winter when the first snow fell. How she'd sometimes stare north and make a sound no captive bear should know. The hunting call of a wild polar bear. One evening, as the northern lights painted the tundra emerald, Ethan unlatched Nanak's gate for the second time in her life. She hesitated. "Go," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "She's waiting." Nanak took 3 steps into the wild, then turned back one last time. Not to stay. To say goodbye. As her white form vanished into the swirling snow, Ethan smiled through tears. Some bonds outlast blizzards. Some kindnesses echo forever. And in the place where happiness is found, no heart is ever truly alone. End.